Welcome YouTube, this is Barrett from RProgrammingTutorials.com, and today we're going to be creating vectors. What is a vector? A vector is a sequence of values. So, order matters with a vector. If we wanted to create the vector with the values 1, 2, and 3 in it, that would be different than the vector with values 3, 2, and 1. Let's create a vector x and let's store in it the values 1, 2, and 3. So we type in x equals c parentheses 1, 2, 3. We press enter. Now let's print out x. We type in x, we press enter, and we see that R spits out the values 1, 2, and 3. Now note, to create the vector, we made use of the C function. C stands for concatenate, which means to chain together a list of values. We can create another vector called y, and we can set it equal to c of 3, 2, 1. We can print out y, and we see that R spits out the values 3, 2, and 1. Note that x and y are two different vectors. They may have the same numbers in them, but they're in different order. So they're treated as two separate vectors. Now we can also create vectors that have character data types in them, which, to remind you, are just text data types. So let's create the vector with the words cat, dog, and rat in them. Z equals concatenate. Now we must use quotes. Cat, comma, dog, comma, rat. We press enter, we print out Z, and we get the vector containing cat, dog, and rat. Note those are character data types. So with vectors, we can create vectors with numbers in them. We can create vectors with character data types in them. We can also create vectors with logical data types in them. So we could do W equals concatenate true, false, false. Now print out W, and we get the vector containing true, false, false. So we could also create a vector containing complex data types. I'm not going to do that for now, since they're not as useful as the other data types, but just know you would just put in complex data types into the C function and you would get a similar result. So going back to vectors with numbers in them, when I created the vector 1, 2, 3 in the x example, I could do that with what's called the colon operator. So using the colon operator, I'm going to say x equals 1, 3. Press enter, print out x, and we see that we get the same vector. What the colon is telling R to do is it's saying start at 1, which is on the left-hand side of our colon operator, and go up in increments of 1 all the way up to 3. We can also, we don't have to just start at 1, we can start at 2 and go all the way to 6. So instead of creating another variable, I'm just going to print out the vector. So I'm going to do 2, 6, and you'll note that R prints out the vector 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Another cool trick we can do is, say we wanted to recreate the vector y, which is 3, 2, and 1. You can use the colon operator, but you can do it in the reverse order. So we could say 3, 1, press enter, and we get the vector 3, 2, 1. We could do 7 to, let's say 3, and we get 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3. Now I'm going to step back for a little bit, and I want to tell you what the 1 in brackets represents. If we use the colon operator, and we typed in 1 to 300, and press enter, you'll notice that at the very top left-hand side, we have the 1 in brackets. Now what this is telling us is that the 1 is the first element. And as we move across, it's actually cut off with the software that I'm using, cuts it off. But if you move to the right, we have the numbers 11 through 21. And then R starts back at the new line and starts at 22. Now this 22 in brackets is telling us that the number 22 is the 22nd entry in this vector. And it's continuing to print on. The 43rd element is 43. The 64th is 64. And so on all the way up to 295, which is 295. And then to figure out what element 296 is, we just add 1 and we'd say 296 is the 296th element, and 297 is the 297 element, 298 is the 298 element, and so on up to 300, which is the 300th element. So that's what the brackets are. And that's why I said we'd hold off until we covered vectors, is because that's where it comes in useful. So it's just a way to tell, it just organizes when we print out a vector that's very long and has a lot of entries, it helps us know what element of the vector we're looking at. So there is another way to create vectors, and this makes use of what's called the sequence function. So I could look at the sequence from 0, we're going to actually type it out, from equals 0 to equals 1, comma, by equals 0.5. We press enter, and you'll notice we get the sequence that starts at 0. That's where the from comes into play, from equals 0. Then it goes all the way to 1. That's where the 2 equals 1 comes into play. And it goes by steps of 0.5, which is where the by equals 0.5 comes into play. So we start out at 0, we go in an interval of 0.5 to 0.5, we add on another 0.5 and we get to 1. We could also do the sequence from equals 3 to equals 8, by equals, we'll say 2. And here we get 3, 5, 7. We're starting at from equals 3, we're moving by steps of 2, and we're going all the way up to 8. Now you'll notice it only went to 7, and that's because when you start out at 3, you add 2, you get 5. When you add 2 more, you get 7. But if you added 2 more, you would get 9. Now 9 goes above our 2 argument, which is 8. So we're not going to go past 8. We're going to go to the largest number that is not past 8, and we're going to go by 2's. So that's what happens when your interval jumps in a fashion such that you're going to go past the top of your sequence. It just goes to the largest number that it can without going past that 2 argument. Now we can also go in a decreasing order. So we could do sequence from equals 1 to equals 0. And now when we do the by argument, because we're going in a decreasing order, we need to use a negative argument. So we're going to say by equals negative 0.5. We press enter, and we see that we go from 1, we subtract off 0.5, and we get 0.5. We subtract off another 0.5, and we get 0. So that's how you do a decreasing sequence. Now, there is another way you can use the sequence function, and instead of using the by argument, you're going to use the length argument. So we can do the sequence from equals, say, 9 to equals 8, length equals 3. So this is going to create a vector that goes from 9 to 8 in decreasing order and has a length of 3. So the first thing to notice is that the length of the vector is 3. It has 9, 8.5, and 8 in it. it did go from 9 to 8, and R automatically determines the step to make the vector of length 3. So we could do an increasing sequence, sequence from equals, say 1, and we're going to go to 4, 2 equals 4, and we're going to have length equals 4. And now we see that it's going in steps of 1 because that's what creates a sequence of, or a vector of length 4 that goes from 1 to 4. We could have also accomplished that by just doing 1 colon 4, and we get the same answer. So you can approach vectors from multiple angles. You can use the sequence function, you can use the colon operator, you can also just create the vector, concatenate 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are a variety of ways you can approach vectors. And the way you approach it depends on whatever is easiest for you or whatever method you're most comfortable with. So the last thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the repeat function, which in R is written out as REP, and it stands for repeat. So we can repeat REP, the number 1, 5 times. And we'll see that 1 is repeated 5 times. So it creates a vector of length 5, and 1 is repeated 5 times. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. We can also repeat a vector multiple times. So we could repeat and then give it a vector, concatenate 1, 2. So it's going to repeat this vector 1, 2, say 3 times. And you'll see that 1, 2 is repeated 3 times. So that's the repeat function. We covered the repeat function, we covered the sequence function using the length argument, we covered the sequence function using the by argument, we've covered increasing and decreasing vectors, we've covered the colon argument, and we've covered creating vectors of different types, number vectors, character data type vectors, and logical data type vectors. So that's going to conclude this tutorial. I hope you learned a lot. Next tutorial, we're going to be covering extracting specific elements of the vector. So say we wanted to grab this 2 out of this vector of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements. Well, we can do that in R. So we're going to cover that next. Subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. Go to RProgrammingTutorials.com. Check it out. Tons of content, a great ebook on there. And I look forward to teaching you more in the next lesson on vectors. Thank you.